Thank you for tuning in to Community Works Institute Spotlight Series. I'm Zack Ritter. I work at Cal State Dominguez Hills as the Associate Dean of Students. Thank you, Joe Brooks, for letting us use this space. Joe Brooks interviews folks on Friday. I interview folks on Sunday. Please check out communityworksinstitute.org, where you can look at professional development opportunities. They just had a really cool institute this last week where they brought a bunch of speakers and did some interactive stuff online. We missed being in human form, but hopefully back soon. Yes, check out communityworksinstitute.org. Today we have a very special guest, Zahir Robb, a family friend, is the most important thing on my on the resume that I looked at as a family friend, but also New Roads School Director of Admissions over here in Santa Monica, and also governing board member in South Pasadena Unified School District. And I also want you to introduce yourself. So also say anything that you would like to, an introduction. But I guess my first question is, like, you know, as a family friend, I always would go over to your in-laws' house, and you just always are that guy that has his stuff together, and you're doing like 100 different things. And so, like, what's your secret, man? Like, when you wake up, what do you do? Are you eating your Wheaties? What do you do that you take on the world like this?
It is smoke and mirrors is what it is. It's a magic trick. Yeah, starting my day at 4 in the morning, I think is the first step, because do what I'd like to do. I think you need a full day.
Yeah.
But no, I think, you know, and thank you, Zach, for saying that. But I've always just believed that if I have something I can contribute,
Hmm.
you know, let's find time in the day to do that. And I know in each opportunity that I participate in, whether it's, you know, coaching sports or being on a school board or leading a political club or, you know, whatever it may be, it is going to pay dividends to society. I will benefit, my community will benefit, my own children will benefit. So why not give what you can? And I think I just kind of run on fumes, and then I crash at night and I rinse and repeat. So yeah, sometimes I don't recognize, and then someone will ask me to give a presentation and or kind of list, you know, hey, like, put what you're involved in. I kind of list it all out, and they kind of look at that, what when do you sleep? When do you get time for yourself? It's like, I don't know. We just kind of make it work. And I'm fortunate to have a great partner who is also as actively involved and engaged. And so we kind of, you know, trade off. You know, I come home, she'll go off to her event, and then, you know, she'll come home and I'll go off to another event, and you know, kind of make it work. But we're both kind of, you know, run really fast, and it's come together for us. So yeah, it is like I said, early to rise. I don't know what the early to bed part, but early to
Yeah,
rise.
yeah. Yeah, Noelle is a powerhouse too. Yeah, y'all are a powerhouse couple. So when did this start, this whole notion that you wanted to get into education and make a big change? Was there a moment in K through 16 where you were like, oh, damn, this is what I want to do? Because I know you have a sibling that works in politics. Like, were there
Yeah,
other fields that you were looking into?
I mean, I think teaching has always been there for me. I don't know if making a change through teaching was always in my mindset, right? You know, mother who's a school teacher, stepfather who's a school teacher, you know, my father, you know, worked in public university, and I love being around kids, right? I coached growing up. I worked in a classroom as part of a regional occupation program during high school, as camp counselor. All throughout college, I spent time, you know, working in schools around youth. So I knew teaching and the profession and mentoring young people was part of what I wanted to do. But I only knew one way of teaching and one way of learning, right? I was in a public school system. I was surrounded by public school educators. You know, my wife, my partner, is also a public school educator, and her father, right, you know, as your mother, you know, LA Unified, right, for 40 plus odd years. And so that's all I knew. Growing up, I think I, you know, knew of parochial schools kind of in the neighborhood, but they weren't all that different from what I understood from what a public school offered. And I think it was really my own journey and sort of reflection on my own time in school that caused me to think of, there must be another way, right? Like is this the only way to teach? is this the only way to go about learning? And I think I've been on that evolution for a while now. And I think it's really solidified watching my own kids go through school and starting to recognize that there must be alternatives, right? There must be new ways of going about this, because I think my own education, on the surface, right, was well resourced. I had great opportunities and possibilities within my school, but I don't think I really took advantage of it. I didn't know beyond I wanted to become a school teacher. I wasn't learning for learning's sake. I wasn't asking the questions I should have been asking. And I really didn't know how to go about doing that. And I think, sometimes if the model that surrounds you doesn't foster that, it's hard to kind of take those leaps. And that's sort of been my move and transition over towards progressive education. It's a sort of globally known, right? Came through that. But, again, I think I had some great mentors in my own life, from my own family, of course, but some good teachers too. And I think those that sort of pushed me along that journey were those that really connected with me on a more human level, those that sort of spoke to me as more than a student. I really recognized me as an individual, as a human being. And that's sort of, I think, what I really look for as an educator, right? To really connect with young people, to really honor and respect them, and to allow them to sort of be validated in their experiences. And I think that makes a world of difference.
So you're watching your 3 kids go through this strange COVID transition onto online learning. Tell us a little bit about what or what we call progressive education, and even just seeing your 3 kids, grapple with these different modalities.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that it's funny when school shut down in March, right? I think we sort of expected when it first happened to, this will be a short thing. Initially, so my kids go to the local public school, right? So initially things were kind of quiet on their schedule is pretty mellow day. And so I had this great opportunity where work was also kind of light in the beginning because we didn't know what we were doing. So we created these fun curriculum units, and it would be an immersive experience around, hey, you guys tell me, what do we want to study? What do we want to learn about? Okay, we're going to learn about orangutans. Great. So then I have this opportunity to say, okay, we're going to learn about orangutans, but we're going to do it in this. I've got a kid in, kindergarten. I've got a kid in 3rd grade, and I've got a kid in 7th grade. I've got to create a program that spans all these grades. There's an opportunity to really allow them to make connections between subjects, teach it as a holistic unit, allow them to, teach each other, work collaboratively around things, get out in the world and explore, and just sort of, have a good time with it. And for the first time, I saw my kids sort of, move down that pathway, that they've been involved in, which is very much a good education, a solid education. And I think they've had great teachers, but it is very traditional education. And it was kind of an entry into sort of a more progressive opportunity for them. And, it's hard sometimes to work in a progressive school and see a program that instituted in every way in which I believe education should be done, and then yet not have those same opportunities for my own children. And that's, been something I've grappled with. But again, I think they're fortunate enough to be in a great public school system, and great community and great teachers. But I just wish there was more opportunities for sort of, the more of a pulling out of them rather than pushing into them, which I think is the biggest dichotomy between those two systems, right? I think what I've noticed the most is that I feel a lot of pushing into my kids versus allowing them to uncover and emerge within that program. And so I think there's a lot that's reliant upon me as a parent to sort of provide those opportunities to ask the bigger questions, to get them to explore a little bit more, dive in a bit deeper now and again. But that's kind of the biggest piece I think we noticed is when it first started. And I think the other piece is we really recognized the opportunities we did have, right? I was fortunate enough to still be employed. I was fortunate enough to have flexibility and be at home as was their mother, right? We had a roof over our head. We had quality internet. We had enough technology and devices. So my kids had the access and opportunity that I know a lot of kids did not, right? When we made that transition as a public school district or even as an independent school to move remote, how are we getting devices into the kids' hands that don't have them? How do we get them Wi-Fi and internet? How do we, provide for those that are on free and reduced lunch and make sure they still have food, right? How do we make sure that their health and well-being and all that comes with being physically at school can still be maintained in a remote environment? And that was, I think, a much bigger challenge, and still remains a challenge, more so than translating a curricula off, out of the classroom and onto a screen. I think that's a challenge, yes. But when we talk about food scarcity, when we talk about the health and well-being, and both physical and mental of our young people that are sort of in our care and under our sort of charge as board members or administrators, how do we ensure that remains? And that was kind of, I think, what drove my decision-making process as a school board member. When it came to what are we going to do? How are we going to use our resources? Are we going to drain our reserve budget to make sure people stay employed in food services? Maybe we get compensated, maybe we don't, but that means A, those food workers stay employed, but B, we can still provide free meals to anyone who wants it. I mean, that's the reality, right? We're not checking IDs. We're not going through it. It's just like, hey, if you come by and you're here and you need a meal, you're going to get one, right? And these are sort of the decisions we have to make as a district, right? Kind of go through, and thankfully I've great district and a great team around me that was like-minded in the sort of decision-making process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should talk about food distribution, because that's part of my job as well at Dominguez Hills. Educare, I guess, means to pull out, right? So education is to draw out of the student. And Paulo Freire talks about, pedagogy of the oppressed and the banking method, and just, shoving things into people's brains. Why, maybe this is a philosophical question, but why in private schools, Montessori, Summerhill, Waldorf, we have these curricula where it's very tactile, and it's pulling out of the student, and it's like exploratory, and then in public, it is, and even in a very, I don't know, I guess South Pass is more a privileged public school system. Why is there still this kind of 19th century, just push it into the brains?
Yeah, I think there is a comfort with familiarity. And this is the model that's been in place for a long time. And I think when that's all that's sort of where you operate, right? And the vast majority of individuals grow up educated in a traditional system, whether that be in an independent school or in a public system. There are very few progressive schools, right? We're fortunate to be kind of, in a system that has a wealth of educational options. But you go to, even outside of LA a little bit, and you're going to see, yeah, sure, there's an independent model, there's a private model, there's your public and your charters, but they're all, relatively similar in their structure and what they offer. And so I think, again, we go with what's comfortable. We also look at scale, and we look at size, right? What is easier to control? What is easier to maintain? Is a very simple traditional method, right? And I think there is an evolution for sure. And, people's put a lot of time and thought into, how do we make change, and how do we sort of adjust our methods and programming. But I think about, again, even just like a teacher preparation program, right? And going through a credential and getting an administrative credential and all the things that were supposed to prepare me for a classroom experience. It's all very much suited towards this traditional model, right? So it involved me to kind of go through a journey on my own to explore and uncover these new ways of teaching and learning. And I think too, there's some nervousness by parents, even in an independent school, let's say, where, okay, these guys are telling me that this, program will work, but, I don't know, right? Like I didn't go through that.
Yeah.
I didn't experience that. Do I really trust that this is going to happen? And things are going to look very different, right? And it's going to take some adjustment. That's not what I'm used to. It's not what I've seen. And it takes a leap of faith in many ways to kind of, take that first jump into these models. And I think especially for families that are coming from public systems in which this is all they've seen. I think in LA, at least you've heard of friends, right, who've gone to X school, or you kind of go through, or back east, you may have heard of like, yeah, I'm familiar with these things. But if all you've seen is one model, and then all of a sudden you're saying like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to call our teachers by their first names, like, I'm sorry, what's happening there? You're not going to get letter grades. You're going to get written evaluations and feedback. Yeah, your child's going to emerge as a reader. Not everyone's lock and step at the same place at the same time. There's a lot of discomfort there that comes with that, because I, again, am going to ask, well, I see this kid over here is doing this. Isn't that what my kid should be doing? Versus allowing them to emerge where they come in. And I think that's, again, it's difficult. And I think as I first dip my toes in the water too, I had questions, right? Does this really make sense? Does this really, kind of relate to me? And I was fortunate enough and, to make my first transition from public schools into an educational nonprofit that was starting in an independent school, or private school, I guess, because we were part of a larger nonprofit. So we didn't have our own independent board. And it was, a group of young adults, thrust into a school and kind of build it from the ground up. And we had a great large education nonprofit behind us that provides with resources and opportunities, but a lot of freedom and flexibility to experiment. And, I hope it went well. I think it went well. I think, the graduates of that program had a good experience, but look, we were learning on the fly, I would say. I evolved, I know, in that journey and went through my evolution within that program and learned a lot and made mistakes, as we all do. But I think that was the best way to go about it, was to learn by doing, which in many ways is what a progressive school is about, right? I just did it as an adult, and sort of, again, honed my educational chops, I think, in many ways within this system after spending most of my time in pre-K through 12 settings in the public model, right? And just learning and growing. And so, I think there is a conversation about what do we need to do for these young people. I think as we go through this pandemic, it's causing a lot of people to look at the systems that we have. I think it has obviously put a spotlight along the DEI lens as well. And in many ways, I always think about what are the roots of a progressive school? And one of them is to sort of, right, the validity of each child's experience. And when I think of the beauty of, what really works in DEI conversations is the ability to exchange experience and to hear one's voice and to validate their sort of lived experiences. And I think too often we either have more diverse public settings, but unfortunately they're quite often done in a traditional manner. And so we don't get that opportunity to have that voice shared or heard or perspectives given, because we're kind of moving along sort of a pacing plan, right? And sort of forced by a system, right, that has been established. And we all know those systems may have been established for any number of reasons. Some of those have a lot of bias behind them. And then you've got these beautiful progressive institutions that sadly, I think quite often can be somewhat, homogeneous, right? They're not as diverse as they could be. And so you have this opportunity to share experience and dialogue and conversation, but very rarely do you get the diverse perspectives you want. And so I think that's what's been so wonderful for me within my current school site, New Roads, is that I've got the marriage of those two spaces, a diverse school setting that allows for that progressive Socratic sort of journey to happen, in which people can become their authentic selves, as emerges who they're supposed to be versus what society sort of places upon them, but also have this beauty of diverse conversations. And I think that's the kind of cool thing that I've been able to experience where I am now. And I really wish could just be available to everybody. And I think that's our goal now as an institution, is to create more evidence and more models and more examples that what's happening at New Roads works, and it can happen in a diverse public school setting. You
Mm.
know, it's going to be uncomfortable for a while there, but you can open up to it, and it can happen, and imagine the beauty that can come out of it when it occurs.
Mm.
Um, you know, we as a public school district just launched an ethnic studies unit for our ninth graders when they come into the high school.
Mm.
And the feedback was tremendous, right? They were more engaged with the literature. They thought it provided more diverse perspectives and different lenses through which to look at the world. And right, that's a singular course. Imagine if that's embedded within a program K-12, what that does for a young person in the world that we live in, right? And I think that's what I'm hoping that we can continue to push and expand and open within the public school setting, or whether New Roads can do within the other independent schools that we work with, but also, you know, the public and charter districts we work with as well. So I think that's really important for us.
Mm. I'm reminded of the Dr. Martin Luther King quote that we have socialism for the rich and harsh capitalism for the poor. And I think that's plays out in our public and private school systems in some ways. But with that in mind, like, why is it so difficult for public schools to change? Because this is exciting. You're showing the data from, you know, New Roads and be like, look, we can do this in public schools. But you also serve on the, you know, South Pass board. And if it's anything like LAUSD, it's probably very, very slow to adopt new stuff and change. Why is that?
You know, it's the age-old, right, bureaucracy, right? Things, you know, you need a lot of people to sign on, a lot of people to adopt, a lot of people to move things forward. And right, it's shared decision making. So you need a board that can kind of move along in that same direction. And I think, you know, going back to what we talked about at the onset of this idea of what works and what doesn't, quote unquote, work. And I think anytime we look at making a change, so for example, our high school principal has been very good about adopting and looking at a program called Challenge Success. And this is kind of based out of Palo Alto, and, you know, really was built around this idea of, you know, what are we doing to our young people when we force them in this sort of, you know, rigorous, as it's, you know, called, I don't know if that's the right term though, curriculum and program, right? Where they take AP European history, even though they have no interest in history, just because they've got to make their transcript look as strong as it can be, right? So let's look at what we're doing in terms of our scheduling and balance and finding an opportunity in their lives. But as soon as we look at that, the conversation comes in, going back to your sort of, you know, capitalism sort of argument about competition, right? And like, well, they're competing against these kids, and so if we don't, you know, give them that amount, they're not going to get into these colleges, and those colleges are the only pathway to X, you know, careers and financial security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think those are the headlines, right, that we've grabbed, and the sound bites that we grab that cause us to lose sight of what is the real goal of an education, right? And I think that's the hard part is, you know, if we're just looking for people to, quote unquote, get ahead and make a lot of money, what are we really doing to society? And I think in large part, we've created school structures and we're now reaping what we've sown, right? We have leaders at the very top that have very little experience with other, have very little experience with empathy and understanding. And so you have these singularly minded leaders out in the world that are making decisions with very little question about equity or the consequence of the decisions that are being made. And that's really concerning, right? And that's what I hope that we can really look at as public school systems. So we'll continue to sort of lead the charge and the people that go out in the world is, how do we make sure we build in a program that not only educates sort of the mind, but the heart as well? Because I think that balance, right, is where that wisdom comes from, right? We need that balance there, and it can't just be reliant upon our parents, right, to provide that. We are schools, our charge is much more than just math and reading, writing, arithmetic. You know, it is really the education, I think, of the whole child, right? We are not, yes, you know, the parents will sort of set the moral foundations and other things along those lines, but we should provide the academic tools and skills and equipment they need to think critically about the world that's around them, and to really look and experience life in a more full way, so that they can approach the problems that they will surely face, that we're facing now, but will sadly only increase in the near future. They need a new set of skills, right? It's not a trade school program. And I think, like you said, we've been doing this for, the same model for over 100 years. And it was a factory model, right? It was, let's condition them to be able to work in that system. That's not the world we live in, right? What are those essential skills we need, the enduring skills that will last well beyond, the time where we have sort of, that ability to access facts and information faster than ever before? Well, how do you discern fact from fiction now?
Right.
What do you do with the information you have? How do you think critically? How do you work collaboratively? How do you look at things more broadly and, again, through a more equitable lens? Those are the enduring skills we have to build within there that will last well beyond, well, I aced AP Chem. Again, I don't know what they're going to do with that unless they move down certain fields. I think it's those essential enduring skills that we can teach them in AP Chem, hopefully, right? Like, let's really think critically about the material that's in front of you. Let's ask these bigger questions of why and how and what's possible. Let's make connections between the chemistry and the other disciplines we study. Let's make connections between the chemistry we're doing and the ecological crisis we're facing as society. Let's do that. And then let's make a real meaningful experience out of the AP Chem program versus what's going to come up in May and what do I need to know. And as long as I cram it in and do well on the AP test, I've now provided a pathway to college, which I'll check another box and then move forward. So, I think that's the piece that I would like to see, kind of come to the forefront, but it is tough, right? Parents want still, I think, a select list of schools. And if they don't make it into those schools, there's, their child's not going to quote unquote make it, what's going to happen. And we get caught up in that all the time.
Are you, and I'm still curious about the orangutan curriculum because all I know, well, I used to work I volunteered at the zoo, and it means the old man in the forest, right? In Bahasa Indonesian, orangutan, but people mispronounce it and it's like orangutan, which I think it means a bad word in Bahasa.
I think, Tang is right, our powdered juice beverage, and people get caught up in there. But yeah, we did, again, a geography unit, right? We did a whole piece about palm oil, and then we grabbed things around the house and investigate like what has palm oil and what doesn't, and why don't a lot of items in our households, we eat pretty cleanly. And it was just like, okay, well, why might that not be in there? But what is then the social sort of equity lens around palm oil, right? And long shelf lives. And it took us down a whole nother journey about, well, why do we have shelf stable items, and why do we need them? And what is the privilege we have to be able to access fresh and reliable groceries that may mold quicker, but it's fresher and easier and probably better for our health. But it's because of the access and privilege we have, right, to grocery stores. So, that conversation just went in so many different directions. And, we had art lessons and math units and a whole bunch of different things. And again, it was just, it's just fascinating to see the world through your kids' eyes. I mean, the other day I was listening to this great podcast on tipping. And, my son Elijah was listening to it, and he just started asking me all these questions about it. Like, well, what's the problem with tipping? And, we just sort of had this long conversation about, I said, I don't know if there's a problem, but let's talk about it. Like, here's the different sides arguments. Like, what do you think about this? And kind of, putting a lot on a child about like, are we paying the wages that the restaurant should? And is this living wage? And, Mark said he'd never tip. And, probably a lot for a 10-year-old to digest, but look, I've got time at lunch, and he's listening to the podcast I'm listening to. So let's do this because I've got time with you. So it's kind of fun to have these
orders, right?
Yeah, it did. That's where it was. Pullman was able to bring in, and he only hired Southern, Blacks, and brought them in and said, hey, this is it, right? This is how you earn your wage. And it kind of created this servitude model of, I got to hustle to get my wage, right? And it was just kind of wacky, and we carried on the system. And apparently a lot of the early sort of Americans were against it because it was this holdover from the British system, right? Of just sort of, you would come through and the person in the house would do services, right? And you'd have to tip them because otherwise you wouldn't get your boots signed, or maybe they'll spit in your food or what have you. And when it came over to the Americas, they said, no, this is a European thing, right? We're not British. We're a new group. We don't want this. But it took hold, and it's weird because tipping is solely American nowadays. I feel it's kind of changed, right? It's wacky. So who knows?
It's funny you say that, because I'm reflecting on my own childhood, and I wanted to get some toy gun at Knott's Berry Farm, and Eric, my father, said, well, where is it made? And as a little kid, I'm like, dude, these things are made somewhere? Like, what is going on? And then he showed me where it said, and it said made in China. And he just went into this whole like diatribe about like 94 and NAFTA and Clinton and like shipping of jobs overseas and the closure of factories. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess maybe we shouldn't contribute to this and get this gun. And it was just a real education for me. And I remember I also had Mr. Takagaki in high school, and he basically like had folks like look at their shirt, be the tag of their shirt, and say like, well, where is it made? And then he started showing us these videos about Bangladesh and Vietnam, and again, outsourcing, where you can pay an American low wage, but you could pay a Bangladeshi like, 5 cents. And what does this mean for human rights violations? And what is a sweatshop, and why is Nike, we think it's so cool as basketball players, because we were into that in high school, to wear it, but we're showing off to each other. But underneath that iceberg of visual fictive, mythical play, is all these kind of sweatshops and people's lives being ruined. And it made you think. So I like what you're talking about, because it is more applicable also to one's lived experience and what's like in your neighborhood. And why are there so many Walmarts in my neighborhood? And it says neighborhood, like something like friendly neighborhood store, but it's not that.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're talking about, right, with both your dad's conversation and Mr. Takagachi, right, is this idea of talking with young people versus talking at them.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, it's okay. And like I said, like, is this all going over the head of my child? Like, it could be, but I think it honors him and gives him the opportunity to ask questions at a very adult level. I could say like, hey, this is beyond you. Like, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it another time. Or when you get older, we'll cover this. But I think there's something beautiful about talking with young people, and approaching them at a level, because they will surprise you with what they're able to do. And again, I think that's where, going back to our models of education, right? I think we're in many ways conditioned to be the leader in that classroom, right? And there's this mantra, and it was told to me too, right? Come in the first few days and you come in hard, right? Like you set the tone in that class, otherwise they'll walk all over you, right? You got to do that. And I fell into that trap. For sure, I fell into that trap. And I did it. And I learned over time, like, no, that is conditioned on sort of my, like, not earning respect, right? But really just imparting that sort of, I'm up here and you're down here, and this is going to be the model for the rest of this year. And I learned very quickly that erodes over time. And unless you got to keep ratcheting it up, right? Like over and over and over, and that's not going to work at all. And so over time, I realized that you can do so much more by just simply honoring and respecting these young people for who they are. And when they see that you see them as a person, and that you are open to them, and that there's this level of respect and engagement that's very relational in that classroom, it changes everything, because that permeates throughout the classroom. Now the kids relate to each other as well. And I think when we think about teaching, it is inherently relational, right? As is parenting, as is in friendships or anything else in this world. And if you build it around relationships of trust and respect and honor, that will carry you throughout a year. Still takes work for sure, but it's not this artificial sort of, again, ratcheting up that you have to put in, an artificer entry into that equation. It's something that's built, it's something that's earned. They know you're invested in them, and therefore you're invested in the class, and they'll invest back in. If you think about, I don't know if this is the case for you, but I know it's for me, right? Sort of that piece, like when the parents, it's like, the worst thing is when they like kind of, you can tell they're disappointed in you, right? It's like, why? Because you have this level of respect for them. And it's the same thing in a classroom, right? Like, you don't have to say anything, but they'll kind of look at you and they can tell like, oh man, I've let this person down. they're going to shape up. I didn't turn in an assignment that
Right.
let down our class, it let down our community, right? Like, you didn't do the work today, it's going to hamper everyone's experience, right? And when that starts to be built into them, there's an accountability, again, that's much more powerful than an accountability of a grade or points or whatever it may be, or a sticker chart or a star chart, right? Like, again, I just don't think that carries much weight in this world. I think it really, builds over time, and it's a much healthier way, because that is what sustains a person in life, right? Like hopefully my employer isn't listening, right? But like, I do my job for a lot less, right? Because I love my job.
Yeah.
It's not the financial piece there. I think, yeah, that helps. It doesn't hurt. That's
Yeah.
not why I start this job. It's not why I seek out the positions I seek. It's for the right community. It's the right environment. It's a job that fulfills me, and a community that I feel connected to. And that's what keeps you up in the morning, gets you going. Because again, I think that pay can only carry you so far, right? You can only buy so many things, you can only chase so many pieces, and eventually that runs out. And if you're not happy where you are or what you're doing in your station in life,
Yeah.
again, that'll be exhausted in time.
Mm-hmm. No, that's yeah. I think that's why I went into education as well, and I bring to the classroom the same personality kind of modality you're talking about, where I'm not trying to be dominating over you. I build the respect over time, and I try to make an environment where it's not stressful. The world is very stressful and like trauma driven, but here we should try to learn together. I'm not doing pop quizzes. I'm not making you sweat. Like, in real life, sure, you popped a tire, you're sweating, you have to learn how to fix this tire. Yes, that stuff is true. But I've noticed that when I was a child taking family trips and just sitting in the back seat and like looking at the mountains and like hearing, what was it, probably like Paul Simon or Tom Petty or some, folk artist, and some like anti-war hippie lyrics. And I'm looking at these mountains and these lakes and these beautiful things. That's when my brain would be like, ask the teachers in the front seat, which my parents, like, hey, so the singer just said this thing about like that, who are the Viet Cong, or like, or what is this about Nixon, like who's Nixon? And so you're getting this like visual track, you're getting like a audio podcast before those were invented, and it was just a natural learning cycle. And I knew it was apparent not everybody had those types of experiences. And they have their own curriculum, for better or for worse. Each student in their parental place or guardian place has their own curriculum. But I think the question that I want to ask you is, who is it? Giraud writes about teaching to transgress, and we're talking about where things are made, and you're looking at your what's the ingredients of was it palm oil?
Yeah.
Which is very controversial. Not controversial. I mean, it's tearing down rainforests, right? And it's hurting a lot of living creatures. When we talk about race, we're never just talking about pigmentation, right? We're not just talking about phenotype. We're talking about history and race being a signifier for human value in our history, in our world history, in our settler colonial past. I think there's a big fear on a bunch of different sides that if we teach history more truthfully, and we talk about Native American genocide, we talk about Black Holocaust, we talk about these things in honesty, then the whole ball of wax that we have created, that we are like 1776 and like we were this ragtag like British French admixture that just fought off these bad colonialists, and that we do start in 1619, or we even start a little bit further back because there was a lot of stuff happening before that. I just learned, I'm a history nerd, I just learned before 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue and kicked out Muslims and Jews from Spain, almost 120, 30, 40 years before that, in 1311, Abu Bakr II, who was Mansa Musa's brother, is apparently traveled from Mali in West Africa, the Mali Empire, to Brazil, to Bahia. And I was like, damn, like why? And Bahia is still one of the biggest like Black populations outside of the, you know, 54 countries in Africa. So with this notion of like, if we just start like dropping facts that are truthful, that kind of elevate Black and brown bodies and intellect, that we're going to have some type of voting revolution, some civil rights revolution, and some maybe evolution of society. Why are we, I don't know, I guess, why are we so scared of that? But also in private schools, do you see that evolution more readily welcomed?
Look, to answer the first question, right? Like I think we see it in the right proposed, hopefully now defunct, America's First Caucus, right? With like we're this sort of idea that there's a right devolution of American identity by embracing facts, right? And like, look, we want to hear truth and we want to hear facts. Doesn't matter who's telling these truths or telling these facts. Like, we need to hear them because that's what we need to hold on to, right? That is so essential to everything that's out there. And so I think, you know, there's a real fear though that somehow that will change, like you said, the power dynamics. And there's people that stand to lose in that power dynamics and will always hold on to that power, right? Like if we think about like sort of, right, what was the real issue like with Judas and the Black Messiah, right? Like they don't focus enough, I think, in that piece on sort of this whole socialism, right? And sort of like this reality of let's talk about this rainbow coalition of people that are disenfranchised from an economic system that we really want to address. That was the threat, right? It wasn't the other piece. I think like in many ways, that was the threat they're all afraid of. That's who holds that wealth, who holds that power. That's what we're afraid of losing. We're going to hold on to it by any means necessary. And I think that's where we get this fear of, you know, when we blanket it in cultural identity, we blanket it in other terms, but I really think it's a fear of loss of power, right? And they talk about it, reshaping the voting demographic, right? Like, oh, they're going to allow, you know, always comes back to elections and things along those lines. And it's like, look, if your party has the right system and the right values and the right principles that will work for the United States, then what do you care about new people entering into the voting ranks, right? They'll choose your party over the other one, or evolve and create a third party, what have you. None of that should really be of impact, I don't think. But again, it is fear. So I think that's the first piece. To answer the second question, is it any better in the independent world than the public world? I don't think so, right? We've seen a big backlash to schools that tried to make adjustments. I think those schools where they saw the biggest backlash are those schools that did not have a familiarity with diverse literature and text and lived experiences and voice within their schools leading into it. And it felt very abrupt and it felt very otherworldly for those families within that institution, right? It's, I enrolled in the school hearing one language and now there's a different language being spoken and I'm uncomfortable with that language. And I'm comfortable with what it's asking me and what it's causing me to examine and look at. And those schools face a lot of sort of pushback, right? I think it is the sadly hot thing right now, right? Every school's got a DEI program. Every school's got these initiatives in. And I say sadly because I worry that when it falls out of the zeitgeist, when funding gets cut, et cetera, all these great new positions that have been opened will be cut and will be severed, right? And so unless we weave it into the fabric of an institution so that the institution itself cannot exist without it, then it's just dressing, right? These are just add-ons like any other program that you've created, right? Like, oh, we've got this great mock trial program and then that you know, the coach leaves and then we no longer have it, right? And I fear in some ways, if they don't make real institutional changes, it's the same here, right? You've got this add-on cursory program. Are we really embedding it within this? Are we really in it for the long haul? And I think you have to. And I think that's where, you know, I think individuals have to look at their schools, public or private, and look at the decisions that have been made. look at the institution's mission, their vision, their principles. What does their curricula look at like? What are the books that they're reading? What is the structure of that institution when it comes to hiring and the makeup of that community and that constituency? All these are questions we have to ask and make that decision then from there, right? I think quite often in the independent school world, right, it is, part of my role is to go around and look at the schools and say, okay, like, why do they exist? What are they here for? And sometimes I question that. Like, I don't know, right? Is it just an opportunity because I can pay for smaller class sizes and better resources and, great facilities and all those things like that? I'm just doing that. Like, I don't know why this school really exists outside of that, right? It's solely for a privileged opportunity, or is there a larger reason for being? And that's where I've felt comfortable with the institution I work for, because New Roads was created with a very specific idea in mind, right? To really look at the educational landscape in LA and say, how do we bring different voices together under the same roof to exchange in meaningful dialogue and conversation for, I think in the initial ideas was a societal benefit, right? More contact theory and things along those lines. We bring them together and we'll be more harmonious as a result. But I think more and more as we look at it, it's an academic imperative. How can you really look at things critically? How can you really understand a text unless you look at it through multiple lenses? How do I view the authority figure in that book based on the lived experiences I've had, right? And unless I've lived a very different lived experience than you have as one of my classmates or as my teacher, then we're all speaking the same language. We're all looking at this book through one lens, and therefore we all walk out with a singular interpretation of that book. I think it's much healthier when you have a dialogue or conversation that's built around, again, multiple ideas and really questioning, like, well, why do you see that character that way? Oh, okay, I see you see that character way because of how you've lived and what you've experienced and what you have and have not experienced. And as a result, as an adult, I will understand how people have different viewpoints. Let's think about the political specter, right? Like I find it hard sometimes to understand why someone may see different on an issue than my own, unless I've had time to really talk with that person, to really engage with them, to really converse with them and see, okay, like I see we're probably never going to agree on this, but at least I understand where you're coming from on it, right? But I can't do that unless I have time to see their experience, to understand their journey, to see how they may have come to that, right? And I obviously born and raised in LA, mom an immigrant, dad from Northern California, their values were instituted upon me. I went to these schools, I experienced those, went to these colleges, surrounded myself with these individuals, right? All of those pieces are shaping who I am as an adult and how I see the world. And that provide great insight into how I see and think of things. But unless I have that same background information on someone else, it's hard for me to come to that. And I think the classroom is where that can happen, right? An opportunity to really get to know someone, to see how they look at things, to see how they view things. I think too often young people are either afraid to ask questions because they're afraid of like looking foolish. And I doubt any young people are listening, but I really, want to impart this. It's okay. It's okay to ask questions, right? Don't go in there with just confidence and gusto of like, I know it's this way and I know it's that way, because you're going to look back at that 20 years later and be like, boy, was I wrong, right? But it's okay just to ask questions like, so is this what that means? Is this what that looks like? Because that's what we should be doing. Questioning, learning about things. There's still a ton I don't know. I mean, there's a lot more I don't know than I do know. And unless I feel comfortable to ask questions and to continue to grow as a person and learn, I'm always going to just, be behind the 8 ball. And I just want to make sure that, we create academic environments where they feel comfortable and confident to ask those questions. And that goes back to, I think, the original piece I said, which is that relational environment, right? In a classroom environment, if you feel comfortable, then you will ask those hard questions. If you're in a system in many ways that is structured around control and authority, I think you've sort of been conditioned not to ask questions along the time because they rarely get your questions, or you're told that's not important, or that's not what we're covering today. And you learn to sort of like, maybe what I think isn't important, or just I'm not supposed to be asking questions, right? Because that teacher doesn't seem happy when I ask questions. And so how do we create an environment where they know the peers around them trust them and know them and connect with them, that the teacher there is invested in them? Now I'll ask that question. Now I'll raise my hand and take a leap and feel okay with being vulnerable. I surely was not as comfortable as I am in my own skin now. I was not that growing up and didn't have the opportunity. And so, I wouldn't venture to ask those questions in history class, or in an English class. I just kind of sat there and went along with that journey, right? And I think that's part of the struggle we have in that more traditional system, right? We just don't create room for that deep dialogue to take place.
I know we got to wrap up in 10 minutes or so, but I want to ask you a little bit about being director of admissions, and also I want to hear a little bit about being on the governing board, and I also want to ask about being married to an educator, and if that what that does to you. So talking about the director of admissions, one of the elephants in the room is class and class segregation and things like that at a private school. And in my fantasy land, I'm like, man, what happens if all like these wealthy folks in LA, like, I don't know, sent their kids to public school and like and all that, like I don't know, wealth was concentrated in beautifying, developing, sharing in public spaces. I think maybe it's a Pollyanna vision of things, but what do you see as your role in director of admissions at an elite, institution to try to, I don't know, democratize it or spread the tent, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, and that's a question I grapple with every day, right? Like here I am working in an independent school. I never thought I would be in an independent school. I am a gatekeeper, whether I think so or not, right? And so every kid I don't provide an opportunity to, and sadly there's a good amount that we're unable to accommodate. I kept them out, right? What does that mean? What does that do when it comes to like my role, right? And that's a difficult question to ask. I see our institution as an incubator, and I hope that is the work that we're doing. And I think that's what called me to New Roads in the first place, is when I met with the head of school, said, I don't know, I'm either going back to public or, I don't know, I'm going to figure it out. And he said, look, what I want to do and what I envision for the school is taking what we're doing and spreading these programs outside. And so I think like some of the examples would be in our most recent sort of conversation series, and we've had great speakers, right? Like Isabel Wilkerson just spoke, and the ability to partner with Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District and say like, look, we've got this great speaker, we've got this platform, we've run this critical conversation series, but we know this conversation can't just happen amongst independent schools. It needs to spread further, right? I was able to get at our own local public school district, South Pasadena, we started a DI community or committee, and getting the head of that group to come, attend that event as well, right? Like let's expand the tent as you just described, and that conversation push forward, right? Like having our debate coach is amazing, and she goes to public institutions as well and works with those to set up debate programs in those campuses, right? Debate quite often I think is seen as like, only elite, institutions have these debate programs. And so what does it do? It feeds into elite colleges, feeds into elite careers, right? And you've got this cycle. So, hey, if we bring these programs and create them in, public settings, will that kind of make a difference, right? How can we take the work that we're doing in any number of different ways and spread it out into public institutions? But also, can we do it in the independent school world as well? And so what are decisions we can make as a school that will help push our peers down this line, right? Because I think New Roads 25 years ago when it was created was to address this very issue, right? The lack of diversity, the lack of opportunity and exposure that was happening as independent schools. And, the other piece about, them, families just attending their local public schools, I think there's something to be said there too, right? And right, we all living in LA, we know the history of it. Our neighborhoods are so segregated. And as a result, our schools are very segregated by wealth and by affluence.
Yeah.
So even though we'd say, hey, that family would now go to their local public school, well, their local public school is probably a heavily resourced public school.
Mm.
And sometimes I ask that question of like, how do we break down those barriers in the public system
Mm.
to have students really engage and meet and connect? And I don't think busing is the answer, right? Like I think if you just bus kids around and you don't have an institutional program around it, well, you have these kids that are bused that kind of eat in one part of the quad, and the other kids eat in a different part of a quad, and you get parents who are upset and up in arms, and there's no real institutional work there to say, hey, this is why we're doing this. We need individuals to come and speak and meet. I mean, we have kids at New Roads from the city of Commerce,
Mm.
trekking into campus every day and everywhere in between. Well, that's not going to happen in a public setting. Well, guess what happens? Now this kid from Malibu or the Palisades or what have you is now in a classroom with a student from the city of Commerce. And they both exchange in conversation, and they both gain from those conversations, because they're both learning from each other. And that's sort of the unique beauty, I think, of an independent school in some ways, is to provide those opportunities, but only if you intentionally do so. New Roads has given $100 million to financial aid since its inception. And I think that's changed sort of the landscape of what independent schools could and should do in LA. And that's been pretty amazing. And I think that's what we see in college, right? When you get these kids, young people, for the first time, breaking out of their comfort zone and setting foot on a campus around kids from all over the United States and really all over the world, it opens up your mind, right? It creates that first opportunity to have real cognitive dissonance. It opens up the opportunity for you to really dive in deep and have these conversations and kind of start to see the world in a different way. And I think that's the beauty of that independent school. But, like I said, you're right. It happens all the time where I'm just like, man, like, am I in the right place, right? Should I go back to the public system and see what's possible? And that's why I find myself on a public school board, right? I just kind of felt like, where can I contribute to that public system in a way and not have to leave a job that I love and the people that I love? And so it was sort of, like, let me evolve. And you mentioned a little bit of politics in the beginning, right? Like, I've been on central committee and been president of local clubs and on the state central committee as well, and kind of saw opportunities in politics to sort of, create change. And so I think aligning those two fields, right? Education is the, place that I probably have the most knowledge and expertise. So how can I politically get involved in education? School board sort of made sense, right? And it's been a great opportunity. People ask, like, do you regret it? Because this is my first term, and hey, you deal with a pandemic, and people, you went from no one going to your meetings to 100 public comments that's going to last 3 hours, and people telling you hate children or you hate teachers, and on both ends it kind of stinks. And as having a wife who's a teacher, a background of teacher, a family of teachers, and children, I don't think I hate either, but you're being told by 50 people that you hate kids and 50 people you hate teachers. It's not what anyone would ask for, but I tell people all the time, they ask me, do you regret it? I say, no, like, this is probably the best opportunity for me to be on a school board, because this is where I can really lend my expertise, right? It is a real crisis and a real challenge. And I personally feel I'm very well suited for that role. And I feel we've made good decisions as a board. I feel like I've contributed to that conversation, and I would have felt more uncomfortable were I not in that seat as a school board member, because I wouldn't be in on that decision-making process. And so I frankly think it was a great opportunity for me to be on that school board during a crisis that we've just faced. So that's been kind of interesting.
So I want to hear a little bit about how the board is going. And I also, want to give props where props is due, because you are sending your kids to public school. And I think, me and my brother and I think you and Noel and your family, a lot of them went to public school, right? And so I think at least I take solace in someone like you, who I know and trust, is going into these independent school systems and like trying to bring this ethos, of justice and equity, and also recognizing, like, we haven't said the word white once on this interview. And I understand, like, you're serving in a lot of like sensitive areas, and you have to be open to all your constituents. And I think as a consultant, diversity consultant, and also just educator, I have the privilege to go in and be like, this is a predominantly white institution and it's very wealthy, and these are the folks that you're leaving out, and this is the board of trustees, like looks like this, and it's all like older white folks, and you're kind of blind to XYZ black and brown issues. And I'm able to do that, right? Because I'm a white Jewish guy, and sometimes they listen to me more than somebody else, which is also unfortunate. But I just wanted to point that out because I was reading about Jimmy Carter, and he was the last president to send his kids to public school, and he's also the president that ended the draft, which was, some could see it as equitable, democratic, sending people over, but it also is, we know, hyper racialized.
Yeah.
Who's going to go and die, right? Or who's going to serve, however you look at it. But tell us a little bit about, before we go, tell us a little bit about, it's probably been a harrowing last couple months on the board. I mean, how have you guys been navigating?
I mean, it is a difficult decision making process because, usually it's a long-term health impact decision, right? If we provide as a public school district the long-term life expectancy issues, right, of our students, if they have access to career in college, right, if they have high quality education, which creates more opportunities for them, all those things that comes into it, right? But it's long-term. I'm not going to feel it in the immediate. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now we're faced with this decision-making process of, hey, you send teachers or young adults into these buildings, staff members, administration, everybody that comes with it, there could be real immediate impacts. And if that happens, how do you process it, right? Like that's not a decision that I feel comfortable with, right? And so what does that really look like? And so the first time you're weighing sort of these type of decisions, these type of conversations, and that was weighing heavily on me. And I think thankfully, on the other end, we had a lot of support. We had a great suite of health researchers, epidemiologists help us with this decision-making process. And I think for myself, and I can only speak for myself here, but as a board, we did make that decision to kind of, open. It was because the preponderance of evidence showed us that it was possible to do in a safe way. But it was a hypothetical. What if a kid comes on campus, or what if a teacher comes on campus and gets COVID, right? What could happen? Versus, I know kids are suffering right now because of our closures. Mental health, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, lack of food, ability to escape, home environments, gender identity issues, any number of different things that are supported through in-person schooling were not present for those young people. And that I knew was happening. And that to me outweighed the low risk that was possible. But again, science was telling us probably unlikely. And again, it was a risk. It was not happening. And so that sort of was my decision-making process about it was, I know that kids are suffering right now. I know kids are struggling right now. And it wasn't, to me, a academic conversation. Yes, there are going to be consequences to remote teaching and learning. Yes, there's consequences to keeping schools closed for too long. But that was not, I think, the first and foremost in my thinking. I think as we went into this pandemic, I wanted all, and it's hard for teachers, and I know that, but I hope they recognize that my messaging was always, look, if you can't cover everything this year, you can't cover everything this year. It's okay. It's much more important that you're not killing yourself or your students by trying to get through everything in this crazy environment we're in. They have gone through, and again, it's weird, right? It doesn't feel like wartime. It doesn't feel like some of these other crises we read about in history or other things. I don't know how we'll look back on it. But it didn't feel like that, I think, for a lot of individuals. And so we felt sort of guilty of excusing ourselves from not still, maintaining everything we normally maintain. But from my perspective, it's like, look, it's okay. It's okay to let yourself go a little bit. It's okay not to get perfect marks on your academics this year. It's okay as a teacher not to have to cover everything this year. Give yourself some room. Our worlds have been turned upside down, and you need to recognize that. We all need to recognize that and take some time to process it. But again, that was not the academic side of things is something we can address over time. I think for the youngest grades, yes, it's hard because, right, these is when phonemic building blocks are sort of built, right? Math foundations, just the structures of school, right? Kids who started kindergarten on a computer, that's not a normal existence for them. So I'm very sympathetic to that. My first grader, right? Like, it was a very difficult remote experience, but I've got 12 years to catch up on that. We'll catch up on it. But it's more important for me that she's healthy, that she's safe, that she's sound, and that her teacher felt comfortable in, look, I don't expect you to cover all the same reading, standards and structures that were normally going to be in place for her. It's okay. And that, I think, was, again, that was my decision-making process. Again, it was more about just sort of the physical and sort of mental well-being of these young people and of the adults that interact with them, right? Like, how do we support them? How do we hopefully keep them employed as long as we can? And that's, right, part of the budget process, right? We so severely underfund our educational system in the United States and in the state of California in particular. And I will tell you, people look at South Pasadena and say, like, oh, you guys must be rolling in the dough, right? So it's an affluent community. I mean, we are stretching every dollar just to make it work. It is crazy. It is absolutely nuts how little money is available and how you have to sort of rely on external funding to make it happen. And that's where South Pasadena steps in. We're fortunate enough to have a community that will contribute above and beyond through an educational foundation, through PTA funds, things along those lines. That makes up that gap. But it's like tipping, right? We're going back to tipping. Like, is it the community's role to pay the wages of the school system, or is it government's role and responsibility, right? The actual employer. Is it the restaurant's role to play the employee, or is it that the consumer, the customer, has to make the difference to sort of make that happen? It blows my mind. Build in the costs. I'll pay more taxes, right? I would gladly do that and make that work to allow our public schools to be fully funded. I would probably be happier paying more at a restaurant too if the workers were being paid a living wage. But that's another conversation.
I know we got to wrap up, so I'll give you a toss up, and you get to choose which adventure you want here.
All right.
So close out with giving folks, K through 16 educators, a piece of advice that you wish they would take with them in their journey, or when you look back on your career in education or beyond, what are the things that you're going to be like, hell yeah, I and a bunch of people accomplished these things, and I'm happy about it?
Man, all right, I'll go with the second one just because that's what you asked second. So you know what, it is with the kids that I still continue to engage in that have moved beyond, right, that system, to see them as young adults, to see them in careers, to hear their stories, to watch them walk out in this world and know, hopefully, that a little piece of where they are now was imparted based on my influence with them, right? I think less so now, and that's something I'm struggling with. And director of admissions, I don't have that same relationship with students that I used to, and that's a real struggle for me. I don't know. I did not seek a director of admissions position. I was kind of thrust into it. But being a classroom teacher, being a head of school, being a college counselor, doing all those things, right? I had a lot of intersection with young people, and I hope when I look back on it, I had a real great experience through it, and each one of these students have left a lasting impression on me, good or bad. Like I think about, like, as we talk about bias, as we talk about all these things, right? I've been through so many experiences. I remember I was in a public school in San Francisco working for a little bit, and I was working with a group. Let's see, at the time they were 9 years old, 8 years old, kind of, in that sort of third grade age. And I will tell you, they MF'd me up and down, you know, those halls. They said things to each other about their moms and stuff that made me blush. But I was young, I was naive, and as a result, because of how they spoke, I projected upon them a much more adult way of treating them. Not in a positive way, as I talked about earlier, about like talking with them, but talking at them. I think I talked at them, but again, through like I'm asserting myself, right? And I'm treating them as much older as they were. And I remember a young kid, Selassie, and he, you know, went off on one of those tangents, and I said, "Hey, man, you're out of here. Like, go sit out in the hallway," and got the cast kind of settled in. I went out to go talk to Selassie, and he's got this little Hot Wheel that he pulled out of his pocket, and he's like just kind of moving it up and down like that hallway, right? And I'm like, this kid's 8 years old, right? Like I forgot that. I forgot all of that because of the experience I was in, right? And that's the thing is like, and I guess this goes back to the advice. We're always learning. We may think we have it all figured out, but we're always learning. We're always going to make mistakes. I made any number of mistakes, whether I was a brand new classroom teacher or working as an assistant, or I made mistakes as a head of school, and I made, you know, mistakes, I'm sure, as a school board member, as director of admissions now, you know, 15 some odd years into this career. I will always be learning. I'm always going to make mistakes. But again, those impressions, positive and negative, you know, I will carry with me always, because again, it is relational. And I think I built strong relationship with them. And I carry those little pieces with me all the time. And they still, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been on graduation speeches and I'm like choking up, right? Because all those kids mean so much to me. And it's hard because I pour it all into it, and it's just beautiful to see these people go through that journey. And that's why I love education, right? And I'm sure you experience it too. Just seeing these people evolve and our impact on them and their impact on us. It's a wonderful career to be in, working with young people and being on that journey with them is beautiful. And I wouldn't want to do anything else.
Amen. Amen to that. Yeah, there's nothing like it. There's nothing, just you pour all your head space and your heart space into other humans, and then you get emails and texts like years later of like, I gave this speech or I got this award and I thought of you because you taught me that like weird fact about whatever, you made me believe in myself, or you, like, I was gonna get kicked out of school but you helped me like reform myself, whatever it may be. And then that's like, you're talking about money. It's like, yeah, we need the money to like survive in our society, but like that kind of feedback and that knowing that you help somebody in society, that's the best type of paycheck ever.
It is. It's the greatest job in the world. And any way around it. It's new every day. It's amazing every day. I'm still waiting for that email that's going to come back and say, hey, that Bitcoin lesson you gave when it was like $600 per, talking about bubbles, I bought Bitcoin and now I'm going to give you a portion because I'm rich. But I haven't gotten that email yet. I'm waiting for that to happen. It hasn't happened yet. They're just hiding it from me.
Payday's coming, man. Payday's coming.
I hope.
Zahir, this was amazing. You have a beautiful day. Stick around for a second after, but we'll just close out our folks online. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. I'm Zack Ritter. This has been the Spotlight series. Check out communityworksinstitute.org for more professional development opportunities and to see awesome people like Zahir speak about their profession and their passions online. And yeah, have a beautiful Sunday and stay curious. Thank you, everybody. Peace.